Gotham Knights is a game that has been constantly portrayed by critics as a cash grab, a lazy attempt, a shadow of what was, not Arkham. And the last one is exactly right. It isn't Arkham, so why are we holding it to the same standard? As nearly every new review seems to just get this game so wrong because of the stigma Arkham left for it. They say things like the combat is slow, clunky even, the gear is meaningless, yet turn around and praise games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, even though that game supposedly shares a lot of the same problems of bloat, overemphasis on gear and levels. But unlike Odyssey, Gotham Knights actually has a valid reason to be the way it is. The combat isn't like Arkham. Well, if you think about it, how would that even work in a multiplayer-centric game? And people still compare Arkham Knight to Gotham Knights and say how much of a downgrade Gotham Knights is, even though we still make comparisons to this day with Arkham Knight to a lot of next-gen games. But yet we single out Gotham Knights. Why? And it's because of criticisms like this is why I'll be making this video, addressing a lot of these things, going to gameplay, progression, story, and breaking it all down and presenting Gotham Knights in a new light for people. Gotham Knights is built on a unique foundation. The gameplay loop can mainly comprise of one or two knights going out in Gotham City to progress through the story, stop crime, getting gear, leveling up. Gotham Knights' crime system is actually really unique. Every night there are different premeditated crimes, and there's enough variety of these crimes and objectives in them to help make every night feel fresh and not mundane. And depending on how you interact with the system can add variety to the gameplay experience. Unlike Spider-Man, failing your crimes actually gives you consequences. Dying, you lose 10% of your resources. Another example of this is that failing to save civilians from the bombs if you get caught will result in them dying and your character requesting for ambulances. But you keep going. No game over screen. That risk makes crime a lot more dynamic than go here and then beat them up. There's an investigation system. When it's first introduced, you learn interrogating criminals allows for new premeditated crimes to be revealed on the map. Usually they are just question marks that appear if you're close enough to its location. If all of them are shown, it's because you've gathered enough clues, and if you get the maximum amount of clues, which by the endgame is 12, you'll be able to consistently be able to stay on top of crime and know where it's at. On recent playthroughs, I noticed that depending on which criminal faction you interrogate, you'll find more faction-specific crimes happening in the city, which I think that's neat, and if that's the case, that's depth that should be highlighted. And that's really where a lot of Gotham Knights issues stem from, lack of a proper presentation. And the more and more I think about it, I do not envy the developers and the position they're in for making this game. This Liza Suicide Squad game is a mandated game, meaning this isn't something they quote-unquote wanted to make, but by someone higher up who doesn't understand what makes games great, but only where the money is at. Or so they say. But that's an entirely different discussion. But when having to make a game be co-op, being able to play as different characters, unique skills, specific nuances, while also trying to be accessible to the casual audience, which a lot of DC fans are, there's a lot to consider. And I respect the devs for the most part doing well in those things. If you want to take Gotham Knights seriously, you can. If you want to play Gotham Knights as a casual superhero beat-em-up game you can play with your friends, you can do that. If you want a single-player game where you can play as one of these 4 characters with different performances, you need cutscenes and interactions, that's all Gotham Knights. No other game has something like this, especially a superhero one. Yet people will call the developers lazy. I recognize I spent the majority of this video commenting on what people think about Gotham Knights, but this is integral when talking about the game and how it performed. These people who are saying this are people who don't seemingly understand the game or haven't played it at all. Now, I've already explained a good amount of detail about the crime system, but the combat is one of the most fundamentally botched criticisms I've seen in my existence. In this review by IGN, you can see Mr. Freeze has a clear ring of ice around him, while the player is repeatedly trying to attack him, not trying to look for a different angle or solution. Now, IGN and game reviewers, I'm not saying I have anything against them. I personally just not taking a lot of social media outlets seriously because of reviews like this one, but it's clear a lot of people on the internet do have issues with IGN, and also don't take them seriously. Yet, when they see the review, they take it as a fact. But when it's about their own favorite game, let's say, case in point, Alien Isolation, they call out IGN. Want to know why? Because they played the game. Now, I'm aware it's more nuanced than that, but the review has 3 million views, and a lot of people will take a look at this and see IGN, despite what people on the internet say about them, see this and be like, oh yeah, this Gotham Knights. It's not good. Now, for real, talking about the combat is also a mixed bag, and I'll be talking about a lot of the different things surrounding combat, so bear with me here, please. While I admit there are some things that can feel off about it when you first play it that'll make it feel mid, you start the game with your basic 3-hit combos, heavy attacks, and range attacks. Range attacks can be used mid-combo to counter enemies and add some style to your fights, but as you level up, the game opens up, which is to be expected, but there's a problem, and that is the game's progression. As in some ways, it's outright bad. New abilities can be obtained through the story progression and skill trees, and the momentum abilities are incredibly strong, and are best used on certain enemies, which is why you have to do specific challenges to unlock them. There's a point that can be made that there are certain attacks that can't be countered, only perfectly dodged. White Light, which is one of my favorite YouTubers as of right now, made a pretty interesting video on Gotham Knights, saying things like the game deserved to fail. Based on what, I have no idea. One thing that I and many other people in the Gotham Knights community found questionable was this.
League attack in a series of multiple sword strokes and you can't escape or interrupt the flurry. The reason I like fighting the League of Shadows is that it looks fucking awesome, but for half the duration of the fight you're just dodging their basic attack combo. It's repetitive, it's dull, and it's not normal either. You can't skill your way out with a parry because there is no parry, there is no block, your moveset is narrower than a bee's dick, you can't always space them out because they track so heavily, there's no choice to make, no option but to evade.
And not true. Not only is there a specific ability for each character that can be used to counter them, there's in fact multiple ways to counter the League, depending on the character. Showing that there is in fact a lot of depth to Gotham Knights that most people seemingly don't notice. And I haven't even mentioned Timed Strikes and how it helps make combat be more engaging and faster. Timed Strikes is one of the many training challenges you can do in the Belfry, and it adds to the base combat for the player to consider. At the start of the game, you have the 3 basic attack combo. Getting Knighthood, you can get 4 in your combos. You can chain your basic attacks in different ways to make a combo be fresh or interesting in a fight, allowing you to make it look as cool as possible, while also being incredibly effective. As Timed Strikes help the player gain more momentum, and momentum gives you ways to counter enemies' attacks. Wait, is this a rewarding combat system? My word, I think it is. Wow. But like I said, it's a mixed bag. The issues I have with Gotham Knights combat is the enemy design. At launch on the hardest difficulty, the game had issues of damaged spongy enemies, which have since been addressed. But there's still balance issues, like how come the drone users seemingly have infinite dodging capabilities. I understand wanting to make diverse enemy types, but there needs to be more consistent logic. Even though the enemy is clearly on the ground, I still cannot hit them. I'm forced to grab and do a takedown, but that leaves me vulnerable. Once again, the enemy is clearly on the ground. I can hit other enemies that are on the ground, but because I scared this one enemy to the point that he falls on the floor, that's when I can't punch him. And there is, of course, other consistent ways that you can take out the drones, like you use the electricity status effect or prioritize them in stealth, but in combat it's just a mixed bag. This is also something I noticed after I wrote the script, but I was going to complain about the Talons and how they just throw their knives no matter what. But there's actually a consistent way to actually dodge them that I just now noticed as I was recording footage. Apparently when they do this dodge attack, no matter what, they will just throw their knives. Which I think is still kind of stupid, but the fact there is a consistency when I thought there wasn't one is actually pretty impressive, and I think that says a lot about how Gotham Knights combat system isn't the best in terms of presentation of things, but it does actually have a lot of depth and things to consider. Most of the things that influence your gameplay come from completing challenges. People have called this a grind or busy work, which to a certain extent that is fair, but on the other hand, the grind, quote-unquote, is Gotham Knights' gameplay loop. Why wouldn't the devs not want to reward a player in some ways, shape, or form beyond just gear? I don't see how it's much different from a lot of other RPGs where the player can go out of the way to obtain a new armor set or upgrades for the character. Also, this game allows you to play with 4 different characters. I have pondered hard on how they would even do a proper progression system within Gotham Knights, and honestly, I can see why they went with this framework. And honestly, the grind isn't anything invasive, like let's say Assassin's Creed Odyssey. That being said, the game doesn't do a good job presenting a lot of things as a necessity. I've been playing this game co-op recently. I see a lot of people not engaging with knighthood at all, and I feel like knighthood is such an integral part to actually playing Gotham Knights in a lot of different ways. As the knighthood tree opens up a lot more individuality to each of the knight's kits, unlocking a whole new skill tree, an ultimate ability, and a traversal tool. Now, this sounds pretty neat, but on the other hand, you have a lot of people who have criticized this game not unlocking the skill tree, not even knowing that it exists. Why does the game need to tutorialize these things to the player? So they engage with these things to improve their enjoyment, or would that be too much hand-holding? Once again, this game doesn't have a proper progression system, so how can they properly tutorialize all these things? This dev team has been in a really particular position, and I don't think anyone can really have a full answer for this. I can't blame them for doing this. Now, I understand how a lot of casual players do not know this, but there is, in fact, a few things to consider with gear. Air level gear is basic, just things that introduce you to the concept. Not that well developed, I admit, but as you progress gear, we'll have mod slots that allow you to increase certain capabilities, like health, damage, elemental output. It's not the most thought out system, I'll admit, but it's there, and I don't mind it. And it's actually a lot more of a necessity on the harder difficulties. Once you get epic gear, you know a specific gear has specific perks that influences how you can choose to play the game. For one, there's perks such as dodging gives you extra damage, stealth attacks giving you health, things that make grinding gear worth it, especially in the endgame. This is something clearly demonstrated in the stats of each gear. Now, I understand that people are afraid of gear in superhero games, and to a certain extent I understand why. That being said, I will also ask you all who are afraid of these things to consider how would you make a multiplayer game without gear? Because there's a lot of them. I'm just putting that out there. The gear system is also something that falls under what people have labeled as busy work. Luke Stevens has made a video talking about the game at the launch and after that. I have followed his work and I have feelings towards his analysis. But this one thing in particular is what struck me out so much, and I had to present it here.
Out. You encourage the player to try different tactics by making those enemies have large health bars, but be overtly weak to, say, poison effects, or electricity effects, or stun effects, and things like that. That way you're forcing the player to learn how.
Here, this gentleman says that he wishes that elemental effects have specific weaknesses on enemies. Well, boy oh boy, do I have news for you. The game does, and is tutorialized in the latter part of the game when you meet the League of Assassins. But every criminal faction in the game has a weakness, which you can see in the database. And some are resistant to certain elements. Ain't that neat? So there are things to consider and for you to choose to make yourself effective in a fight. Making gear, yes, meaningful. I'll say it's far from perfect. I wish there were more specific ways to grind for diverse gear, as a lot of the ways the game presents you with getting gear, especially in the endgame, you don't entirely always know what you're working for. Its RNG is not rewarding. For example, why are mod chips from very high-level criminal deals only common and uncommon, when they should just be legendary? How come the game's RNG doesn't have any guaranteed drops of any specific gear types? The game doesn't do enough work to actually reward the player for engaging with the systems. It's because of that that makes the game incredibly disheartening to try and play to get gear. That will influence my playstyle, as you're not always guaranteed of any of it. There's some gear you don't want, or you may get duplicates for so long before you're actually rewarded, especially in endgame. Gotham Knights has the gear that I'd classify as rewarding, but the system itself isn't always so. I touched on this a bit earlier, but Gotham Knights also has a good skill tree. People have said that they're too much the same, even though they clearly are designed for each character and their distinct playstyle. Robin is able to be more focused on stealth, Nightwing is able to be more acrobatic, Jason is effective with his guns, and Batgirl emphasizes her bruiser playstyle. And I'm only referring to the first skill tree. There is two more, not even including the knighthood one, that further emphasizes how unique these characters are from one another. The gameplay in the background is all gameplay from me that should probably emphasize how basically each character can take on any group of enemies in a different way, which I think is really impressive. Before talking about the story, I do want to talk about this game on a technical aspect, as quite frankly, before it was revealed to be 30 FPS, the game had a lot of hype around it, despite a lot of people's critiques. Now, I'll say this because the game is at 30 FPS, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone at full price. One, because PC can get the game at 60 FPS and higher, and only at $60. There is no 2, I don't know why I even said 1, that makes no sense. The reason why the game is this price on next gen, because that's just the expectation. I said next gen as well, it's just a joke. And I'll give props to both Sony and Microsoft for promoting these consoles as competitors to PC. There's plenty of research online that you can have that showcases how much of a downgrade these consoles are to a lot of current PCs, and they're more comparable to household items or computers that were released 5 years ago. I assure you that all research is there if you just look beyond the fine print that is on the box. You can say there are exceptions, like God of War or Spider-Man, games specifically designed for PlayStation and not being made on multiple devices with different hardware. Well, there goes your answer. Those games are made for one console, not multiple. So yes, they can achieve things that wouldn't be able to be done so easily or at all. In the case of Gotham Knights, the game was originally planned to be on last-gen consoles, but months before launch, they canceled them. I think that having time to work on a game for next gen definitely hindered how the game performs, and I would have loved more options to support higher frames, but things like lowering the resolution and such wouldn't work according to a developer. And upon my own research, I can understand why. This game is an ambitious title. Untethered co-op with regression, open world, and mechanics like Gotham Knights is actually unheard of for any game. I'll argue with anyone over this.
Dying Light 2 has 4-player co-op untethered.
The game is first person, has less emphasis on the animations, and side content and content in general isn't as dynamic as Gotham Knights. For example, whenever you talk to someone to start a quest in Dying Light, you're automatically teleported to the host. Gotham Knights allows for the co-op player to interact with the host's world and unlock things without the host in the vicinity. Before people mention Unity again, Unity is still buggy, and especially on co-op, and you're not even playing on a shared open world, you're playing with people on missions, and you barely can even access any content in your worlds. So, please stop with the comparisons. I don't even know why I even went on that tangent there. That wasn't even in the script. Okay, I'm getting my water. Okay, we're good. Excuse me. Basically, I can go on and on about the nuances of this game from a technical aspect, but to cap it all off, it's clear that there isn't a clear, straight answer as to why some games are lacking performance, not just Gotham Knights. Games that get even more praise than it struggle to maintain 60 FPS on quote-unquote next-gen consoles, so that really seems like a whole other discussion entirely. Now, talking about the narrative itself, Gotham Knights' narrative is comparable to a DC animated movie, like a pretty good one. The game starts with Batman's last fight with Ra's al Ghul, leading you to play as one of the four knights. The story follows them as they work together to solve Batman's last case, learning about the Court of Owls and how it influenced Gotham's history, and as the narrative progresses, the knights have their own individual narrative that aligns with the events of the story. Dick feels pressured of living up to what Bruce left behind, Barbara is left questioning her worth as a hero and trying to remember her father, his face more specifically. Tim learned to become his own Robin without Batman. Jason coming to terms with being alive. They're all acted and directed really well, highlighting how they treat each other like family and not just people who fight crime with each other, which the Arkham games lacked in such an emotional center. What's also really nice is how the game highlights how different they are in certain cutscenes. With how they act and what they say, it really adds a lot to replay value, and whole cutscenes play out differently in certain cases. The story itself is fine, just the progression of the story is somewhat of a hindrance, as throughout the story you do a lot of basic things to progress. Early game is fine as, you're introducing new things to us, new mission types, how to interact with the game, and so on. It makes sense. But having us go around the city to interrogate criminals late game, just to do a crime we can do in the open world, is kind of ridiculous. Now, an idea I have is that, well, just follow me for a second, is that Two-Face was originally set to be in the game, but he was cut off. What if, In our investigation to find Judge Moreno, we follow a lead that lets us find Two-Face. It seems that Moreno has been trying to contact criminals for protection, so introducing Two-Face here wouldn't even be too bad of an idea. Have us go to a courthouse or something, and you find Moreno and Two-Face talking. They're trying to make a deal for the protection job, but it escalates. We drop in, stop it from getting further, Two-Face can get away somehow, and then we escort Moreno out, and then the Court of Owls is there and we fight them. In contrast to us going to different locations in the city, but instead now having us have a meaningful way to introduce a villain in one singular mission. It would have been sick, but unfortunately Gotham Knights didn't seem to be interested in doing that sort of thing, and there are plenty of unique levels and sections in the story that make up for the issues I have with the narrative. The story ends with a Lazarus-induced Bruce Wayne and the player having to fight and appeal to him, but the game ends rather open-ended, which I guess in a way aligns with a quote the director of the game said in Press Tour. Batman was never able to fully stop crime, so why would you? Interestingly enough, as you progress through the nights and engage with the different contacts you can work with, there is a noticeable lack of crimes you find. One region I went to only had one crime to stop in at the endgame. Showing your efforts do mean something to the city. You see more civilians in the streets, in contrast of letting crime run rampant. You hear sirens, gunshots as you're on patrol. You see police lights blending with the fog, giving the player a contextual reminder there is crime in the distance. This Gotham, on artistic design, it lacks the gothic architecture that defined the Arkham series, but it does feel like Gotham. Fog shrouds over it. Depending on the night, thunder and rain cover the streets. These streets, they have a history of their own. There are landmarks that have a level of grandiosity whenever I drive up to them on the Batcycle. The GCPD Central Building in Old Gotham. The Falcone Penthouse in the Bowery. The Botanical Gardens in Robinson Park. These are places that I can see a Batman want to redeem, want to protect. The city has evolved and still is while retaining its history. This version of Gotham has loads of history before there was a Batman. Different restaurants, different families and businesses, you can see how they influence the city. You can learn about the court and the ties they have with these different families. There's clearly a lot of thought that went into this, and it adds a lot more weight to what the Knights are doing in this situation with the Court of Owls. Just feel like even though Gotham Knights is a really unique game, there could have been a lot more chances to actually explore how deep the rabbit hole of the Court of Owls is. There's a lot of interesting plot points here, like apparently Constance Cobblepot, which we only see twice, and once with a dead dog, but don't hear from again. I wasn't the biggest Court of Owls fan before the game released. I watched a movie or something, but they were cool. Just feel like even though Gotham Knights is a really unique game, there could have been a lot more chances to actually explore how deep the rabbit hole of the Court of Owls is. Now, this doesn't even have to be done at launch. Like I said, the game ends in a very open-ended way. So throughout DLC or side content, we could learn more about the court and see it in a more real and effective way. But I recognize that may be a bit ambitious, especially where this game stands. Like I said, I'm happy with this game's narrative and how it highlights the Knights and their characteristics really well. Just that, the main villain was underdeveloped. And now, the villain arcs that you can do, these are actually really fun. It takes these villains in directions we haven't seen in a while. Harley actually being a villain instead of being an icon, well, she kind of is here, but in a more twisted way, taking advantage of the people's fear to sell her product, which ultimately caused chaos. Mr. Freeze really showing his cold heart and threatening to cause Gotham an eternal winter because his wife was cured and wanted nothing to do with him was like, yeah, no, but yeah, no, seriously, that's a really cool direction for the character. And Clayface is having memory problems, which
wanted that to happen.
How would you know? You weren't there!
These missions are kind of like animated series episodes. They feature great set pieces, interesting character work, and highlights why I love this
Getting the
universe.
hang of taking criminals off the street and stuff.
Thanks.
A big concern when the game was announced was, why can't 4 players play together? Well, a month after launch, Gotham Knights introduced Heroic Assault, a 4-player mode found giving the player a way to get gear from a consistent source, but was rather underwhelming. You fight in a mineshaft for about 30 floors to beat Starro, who's in a container, and you have to escort him back to space for the Justice League. Now, this is a cool concept, just would have loved a better execution, as the Justice League clearly have a pretty big part within these heroes' lives, and actually working with them in some way is cool. But Heroic Assault bogs that down to just doing 1 to 3 different objectives per floor. But the main appeal is playing with 4 people. The second Heroic Assault, the Calvin Incident, that was released earlier this year, added 15 floors, a way more engaging narrative, variety of locations, being able to fight the main game's bosses, new gear rarity to grind. This is pretty good, a rewarding, consistent endgame. And I wish the game was just made for next-gen consoles and focused more on next-gen consoles and had more time, as there's a lot of cool ideas and systems that would have went so far if fully developed. For example, something that Watch Dogs Legion does well is recruiting people. Usually the recruitment process has you do unique missions, like saving someone, retrieving data, a decent variety of content throughout the city. In the case of Gotham Knights, the foundation for something like this is already built in the game. They just need to build off of it. Have it so interrogating certain criminals opens up different crimes. You may learn of a criminal in hiding, or this can lead to the most wanted criminals. Basically, the crime system needs to be more engaging than going out every night and hoping to find the most wanted criminals, or just go out and beat them up. That being said, I do enjoy playing this game and immersing myself in a crime-fighting fantasy that other games like Spider-Man couldn't entirely nail down always. For this outro, I was debating how I should end it. Like, what other things could I be missing? What other little things about this game could I be referring to, or should I even touch on? But honestly, now that I think about it, I've pretty much covered everything. I think anyone who complains about the combat, the lack of a parry system or a counter system for some reason, the open world, the story even to a certain extent, like all these sort of things, and anything else is kind of subjective. But honestly, you can look at Gotham Knights in a multitude of different ways. Some of those different ways I can't really blame people for, but I do blame this industry. How the people on top mandated for a game they don't really understand. How the people who review games for a career fail to even understand aspects of the game for what it is, and see it in the shadow of the Arkham games. To me, I see a game that has the ambition to actually want to give these characters the spotlight. To give people a chance to experience this world of superheroes in a different light. Yet, that light was dimmed out by a lot of noise. I can't even say I blame anyone. The devs chose to be very quiet about a lot of things in their marketing. And so, everyone else was louder. The internet is just such a place where all meaning and critical thought is lost. And everyone has accepted that. And even the developers seemingly have. It takes too much energy, too much effort to understand one another, as that's scary. Things we don't know, we choose to ignore one way or another. But taking that leap, that chance to understand what something means is so powerful. Thank you for watching.